Hi, my name is Maria Ann Early, and this is my risk assessment for the Frank A. Tracey generating station. Before we go into the presentation, I'd like to go over some key definitions that will be used. Risk is going to be defined as the possibility of loss or injury, and this is in any context, whether it be reputational, financial, or otherwise. A threat would be a causer of risk, usually with intent or malice, while a hazard is also a causer of risk, but without the same intent or malice behind it. A stakeholder, which includes you listeners, is an entity with an interest, investment, or concern in something. A likelihood is the chance or probability of something occurring. We're going to be looking at this, and a consequence in relation to risk. The result or consequence would be the result or effect of an action. And vulnerability is going to be the level of exposure and degree of susceptibility to risk. So what the different risks are and how much each one would impact via target. This target is the Frank A. Tracey generating station. It's owned by Nevada Energy and is a natural gas fueled power plant that provides energy for much of northern Nevada. It currently has 8 units working, with several that have been retired in the past several decades. Its peak generating capacity is 885 megawatts in the summer, and this lowers slightly during the winter and other seasons. It's located 17 miles east of Reno, Nevada, a major urban center in the northern half of the state, and is also close to the south bank of the Truckee River. Here are some maps. On the left side, you see a closer view of the station. If you look at the blue arrows, it shows where the risk of flood comes from the Truckee River, and then other transportation incidents. If you look right below the station in the map, there's a road where natural gas will be transported and other people. And then if you look to the right, there's more zoomed out picture. You can see it in relation to Sparks and Reno, the city there, and then even just slightly west of Reno, you see a lot more major Californian cities. The purpose of this presentation is to identify some hazards and threats that are relevant to this station, and to look at how they're linked, how one could lead to an increase in risk in other ways, and through interdependencies. To analyze this risk by looking at the likelihood of its occurrence as well as the consequences that could follow, and to organize these through prioritizing the scores assigned to both categories. We're also going to identify countermeasures and recommend some actions to reduce vulnerability to risk. The stakeholders, including you listeners, include other Nevada energy plants, generating stations, and distribution stations, as the load of fulfilling contracts and meeting the state's needs for energy are distributed among all Nevada energy assets, including this one. Major businesses in northern Nevada, such as Walmart and Kroger, that are big customers and purchase large amounts of energy from us. The Washoe County critical infrastructure and key resources, again as a customer, usually through state contracts for the schools and other buildings, and then just everyday customers that are relying on us for fulfillment of energy needs. Looking through the National Infrastructure Protection Plan, there is an energy sector specific plan that was last written and updated in 2010. And some of the goals that are talked about in this plan are directly linked and applicable to the station. These include building technologies that enable machine-to-machine information sharing. If one machine can locate an error in its internal functioning, especially in relation to the outcome of the system's function overall, it can share that to another machine that then interfaces with human operators, and then action can be taken, so it improves situational awareness. Following the cybersecurity framework of NIST, as well as other organizations, can outline more specific ways to conceptualize risk management and optimization. Making sure that there's a bi-directional flow of threat information. So this applies both within the organization, making sure that top-down and bottom-up information is being shared, as well as between the private sector and the public sector. And then coordination with independent sectors is really facilitated, as the actions of one can highly impact the risk that is assessed by another sector. And then building playbooks and capabilities for industry and government response and recovery as codependent and coordinating agents. And finally, ensuring the ongoing assessment of equipment sharing programs so that the cost of mitigating risk doesn't have to be solely placed on one actor. The threats identified for this target include both natural and man-made threats. The natural ones include earthquakes, floods, wildfires, dust storms and windstorms, and avalanches or winter storms. Man-made threats include criminal acts or terrorism, a cybersecurity incident, equipment or systems failure, hazmat spills or releases, and transportation incidents. And these threats were identified under the assumptions of, frequency that is seen in the media, because I can't actually access reports that are internal to the company on their frequency. The presence of typical weather patterns, these are going to be changing in the next several decades as they have been due to global warming, and a moderate or major impact. So I'm not looking at flood or earthquakes that are barely detectable, but instead major ones. And then finally looking at, analyses done by other companies that are very similar or within the same area and applying them to this target. This is the risk matrix rating scale I was using, looking at the consequences and likelihood. Both are assigned a score, and then they are combined together to produce an overall score that looks at both factors. And then these are the numbers used. It is a very small station, so there aren't going to be very many high or extreme ratings given. This is where the threats were distributed across that scale. You've got your economic threats and your human threats. Most of them are very similar, but the distribution does change slightly. The biggest ones were prioritized, the top 3 for both. They were the same threats, but in a different order. For human-caused ones, you have avalanches or winter storms, earthquakes and equipment systems or failure, and then economic, you have equipment systems failures, avalanches or winter storms, and earthquakes. And there's some reasoning provided. You can go back and read through it later. I don't have time to explain both, but I used other incidents that occurred and then used that to justify the rating given for these specific threats. Some countermeasures that I'd like to recommend. For avalanches and winter storms, it would be important to look at the need for fuel blending and additives to prevent clouding and gelling. And clouding and gelling can lead to other issues with equipment. Insulating the storage tanks and pipes to prevent the same issues, and then looking at avalanche mapping of historic data, and analyzing regional snowfall trends, especially in the course of 5 and 10-year periods as we get cyclical trends. For earthquakes, participation in drills such as the Nevada's annual shakeout drill. This one gets thousands of participants across the state. It's a wonderful opportunity to practice safety measures. Installing methane and other natural gas detectors in buildings, especially prioritizing human-occupied spaces, as if an earthquake happened and some kind of pipe or system was broken, gas could get out that wouldn't necessarily be detected immediately and lead to potential fatalities. And then increasing the structural support for major buildings and tanks, just so in the case of exterior forces collapsing or causing leaks. For equipment and systems failure, I would recommend pre-use inspection of new equipment and replacement parts, even though a company may be good. To buy equipment from, doing an internal check as well could help a lot. Instead of just maintaining as needed, doing some preventative maintenance, so regularly checking things even if they're new, and then also implementing the idea of predictive maintenance. So using data that we already have from our own equipment as well as other companies' equipment to identify points of failure and take action before that's reached. So, if equipment can only handle this many certain amount of pounds of weight, making sure that we cap it below that weight bearing capacity. Risk communication and evaluation is a very important step within the risk management process. Some concerns with this particular target were the information sensitivity and classification, because it is a major provider of energy for the entire state and for public and private resources. Obviously, a lot of the risk analysis was private and can't be shared with the public, as that could be used against the company and used to create and increase threats. There are internal and external reporting standards. It's good to abide by external standards as a minimum, but if possible, to raise the internal standards beyond what is mandated by other government boards. Market competition does exist outside of the state, and this is going to impact the strategies. It is in the best interests of everyone involved to practice safety to protect your standing within the market. And that has to be addressed in terms of more than just simple outcome and income of dollars. And we need overall proactive policy across Nevada Energy. I've seen this a lot within the past couple years, especially with other incidents going on in other states, to strengthen our resiliency and make sure we have backup contracts with, California companies. And finally, connecting all of our mitigation strategies to that energy sector specific plan. And some examples of this are applying NERC's reliability standards to our own measurements and equipment standards, and then also using the Department of Homeland Security's Enhanced Critical Infrastructure Protection Program, which provides people and opportunities for evaluators to come in outside of the company and look at our equipment, evaluate our plans, and then recommend additional actions to increase our protection against risk. So just to sum up these recommendations, they include to evaluate the use of listed countermeasures, so make sure that they're all being effectively utilized, not simply utilized, and to apply new ones as needed. To implement random safety drills and inspections. The randomness is important because you never know when an emergency is going to strike. To participate in public-private sector joint training exercises. It is not solely on us to respond, but it's not solely on the government. It's practicing that coordination can be key. To update our THERA, our threats and hazards identification and risk analysis regularly. What is applicable 3 years ago may not be applicable today. And to contribute to and invest in cybersecurity policies, for this is a very much a sector-specific recommendation, not just a company-specific one. We benefit when other companies benefit and vice versa. Red teaming, if we assigned a team to look at our facilities and try to maliciously affect the outcomes of our operations and use that to mitigate against risk, this can be extremely helpful. And finally, ensuring that mitigation and preparedness is up to date for all units. So what applies to one of our units, just because it's applied there doesn't mean that our older units don't need those same standards. These are the resources I used to gather information. A lot of it was taken from other targets and applied to this one, as well as, assumed from similar incidents within other stations. And here are the rest of my resources. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it and learned.